Hey, this is Green Bast. Welcome to my first video for HUSNG.com. Today I'm going through a series of selected hands at the $60 turbo level on PokerStars. The hands I've chosen are going to focus on maximally exploiting a villain based on his frequencies as well as our reads. Oftentimes in a heads-up sit-and-go you can develop a read on a player, such as maybe they only check behind showdown value when they check flop in position, and it can be difficult to find ways to exploit this because they do have quite a few medium strength hands in the range. The hands in this video are going to aim at showing ways of turning your reads and opponents' frequencies into plus EV plays in situations where you may usually just check fold. We may find ways to increase our value, increase our profit in the hand. First hand I have here is versus player Jake Z Snake, and he's a regular on PokerStars. Definitely a winning player, thinking player. He's not going to get too out of line, and he's capable of some pretty light call downs as well as some pretty big bluffs. And we've been playing just under 500 hands here, and with that kind of sample, a lot of these HUD statistics start to become quite accurate. The ones that really stick out for this player is his flop c-bet and turn c-bet. His flop c-bet at 91% is extremely high, and his turn c-bet at 62% is also very high. So his range for betting flop and turn is not going to be particularly strong. So he min-raises pre, which is his standard, and I decided to flat out of the big blind with a 7-8 offsuit. And I think versus a 81% raising range, this is a pretty standard flat. A 3-bet can also be considered, but this hand plays fairly well post-flop, so I think flatting here is fine. And I check to him, and this is where it gets interesting because he checks back the flop. So he has checked back the flop a couple of times in the matches we played so far, and the time before he did show up with middle pair. So when he's checking back this flop, it's very unlikely he's got air. He's probably got a low to medium strength hand that just wants to see a cheap showdown, is afraid of me check raising this board with a bluff because it's a decent board to check raise bluff. So he's just most likely just trying for some pot control here. I think his range here is going to consist of a lot of jacks. That's going to be the largest portion of his range. Other than Jack X, he is going to have some 2X in his range, some King High that decided to check back, but most of his air is going to go ahead and just c-bet this board. So turn comes a 8 of hearts, and face a little decision here whether to lead into him or to check. And I opt to check, and the reason for this is I don't think we're ever folding him off any sort of Jack X hand, even with a second barrel on most rivers. And if we check here, he could potentially bluff at this pot with some of his king deuce, his king highs that did check back this board. So I go ahead and check, and he bets half pot. I think versus Jake here, this is actually a little bit of a close spot because I think his range is way towards Jack X, but he is going to have some 2X, and he is going to have some King High. So I don't think a call here is too out of line. So I decide to call and reevaluate the river. Now the river comes a Queen of Diamonds, which is actually a fairly interesting card because I don't see too many queens in his range. He could conceivably have Queen Deuce, but I think that's going to check back the turn quite a large percentage of the time. I think he's going to be c-betting his King 10 virtually 100% on this board, so he definitely can't have that. I don't think the Queen gives him two pairs very often here at all because I think he's going to be c-betting his Queen Jack, and this is really not a very good card for his range in general here. On the other hand, if we bet here, just a standard size bet, maybe about 150, I don't think we're getting him off his Jack X very often here, because there is quite a few hands that we can have that completely miss. And we can have a couple of extremely strong hands in our range, such as 10-9, which could conceivably play the same way, although most likely we're going to be leading that hand on the turn a fairly good percentage of the time. So at this point on the river, I'm pretty convinced he's got a hand such as Jack X, and I'm just kind of going to give up on this pot is my thought process, because I just don't think we're going to get him off it quite enough. So I do go ahead and I check the river. Jake thinks about it for a little bit, and then he bets 154, which is kind of a weird looking bet here. I'm trying to think of what kind of hands that he could be betting here for value. And my conclusion with this bet sizing on this board texture is that he's going for thin value with a hand like Jack 6, Jack 7, Jack 9, putting a lot of 8x in my range, maybe hoping out to chop out versus some Jack X, which I could potentially hero fold on the river. He pretty much never has two pair here, as discussed, and he also pretty much never has a straight here, whether that be the nut Broadway straight or 10-9. So with the vast majority of his range here, he's going to have a single pair hand, and he's just going for some thin value on the river. So I decide to make his life extremely difficult and shove here. The reason for this shove is that we can potentially have some two pair combos and some straight combos in our range here. And there's very little pure air in our range here. So if he's thinking at all, what hands can I just be completely bluffing with, he's going to come to a conclusion that there's very few. A lot of my draws are going to be leading the turn versus him, hoping to fold out some of his king highs and his deuce X that did check the flop. By shoving this river, we put pretty much all of his range here into an extremely difficult spot, because out of my value hands, it's very unlikely that he beats any of them. So he's going to have to put me on a bluff, a very high percentage here, and at the same time, there's not going to be a whole lot of bluffs in my range. If we eliminate all the one pair hands, where we look at which hands he can actually call the shove with, it's going to be a very, very, very small percentage of hands here. It's going to be Queen Deuce, maybe a slow played hand, which I don't think that is very likely to be in his range here. Maybe Queen Queen that check back the flop for pot control, but in the end, he's just not going to have very many combination of hands that could comfortably call a jam here. And it's not really the type of board where people hero call all that much. So I think the jam here works extremely well. So he thinks about it for a while, and he ends up folding. And I'm pretty happy with how I played this hand. I think it's just kind of one of those spots on the river where a lot of people just gonna check fold or maybe check hero call, when jamming is really going to be a superior option to that to both of those very high percentage of the time. If this is a fishier opponent, I might be more reluctant to jam here because their range is going to be quite a bit wider and potentially have much more hands that can call a jam. But versus a player with a 91% c-bet, when he's checking back this flop, he's almost playing his hand face up. It's very, very difficult for him to make any sort of call on this river. Next hand here is again versus Jake Z Snake, and it starts off pretty standard. He min raises pre, and I elect to flat with ace nine. Definitely can consider a 3-bet here, but the problem with 3-betting a hand like this is when we do make our hand, if with on an ace high flop, it's really difficult to get any value because he's just going to be folding so often. And well, so far he's folded 100% to my 3-bets. I still think a flat here is going to be a little bit superior. So the flop comes ace 9 7, two hearts, and this is an extremely good flop for our hand, of course. And we just want to figure out the way to get the most money into this pot. Now my standard line here is going to be just to check raise the flop. If he does a standard C bet of 80, take it to around 200 and just try to get more value out of his ace X and as well as his heart draws. A lot of those hands are just going to jam over our check raise, and we're going to be in an extremely favorable spot. Now, I decided to play this hand a little bit differently here, for the reason of Jake Z Snake from our even 110 hand sample here. He has extremely high barreling percentage, and I think this is a board he's going to barrel off a ton of the time. And while there are some scare cards that can come up, I think we get more value versus this player in this instance to let him see a turn and put more money in the pot with a lot of weak draws, a lot of different hands, as well as it can make us more difficult to play against because our range on the turn also has some strong hands on it, so he can't always just continue to barrel. So we see the turn here, and the turn is an offsuit jack, and I don't think this is too terrible of a card. Obviously, the main straight draw on the flop, 10-8, got there, but at the same time, this jack's a pretty good card because he can have lots more draws. He could have turned lots more draws, as well as he can have turned lots of two pair combos. He could have turned a jack with a straight draw. There's quite a few possibilities which are very favorable for our hand here. So since his turn barreling percentage is quite high, I have it at 67%, I think a check here is better, with the intent now of kind of revealing the strength of our hand and raising. Now this line is going to look very strong, but at the same time he's going to have lots and lots of hands that are still going to call all of his heart draws and all of his like Jack 10 type hands, 7-10, 9-10, as well as I expect him to just get in all of his two pair combos, and we beat all but one two pair combo. So check it to him, and he bets quite small on this turn, 140 into 320, and that's kind of an interesting sizing, and it does lead me to believe that he's actually a little bit stronger, or he's trying to price in one of his draws, hoping that we don't raise. But even if he's on the strong side of his range here, we just crush so many hands. He can have ace 7, he can have jack 9, he can have jack 7, but when he bets this small, it definitely does put us in an awkward position, because I think this small size is more indicative of the stronger part of his range. But even so, the way we played this hand, I think at this point is still going to be a very profitable raise here. So I like to raise here to 335, and I make this raise size for a couple of different reasons. The main reason that why I chose this sizing is if he decides to flat here, we're going to have a very easy jam here on the river. It'll be a pot of 990, and he will have 711 back. So it's a very good sizing for this river to just shove in. Now he decides to flat on the turn, which I think is a pretty interesting flat, because we have to consider what kind of hands would he potentially flat on this turn versus this line here. And I think Enrage here consists of a couple different types of hands. The first is going to be the nuts. If he has 10-8, I think there's a very good chance he's just going to flat here to keep our range wide and to keep all the bluffs in my range here, so we can just shove the river and he can call with the nuts. The second type of hand I think he flats here is going to be some of his ace X, which we're ahead of. If he's got a hand like ace 10 or ace 6 or even ace king, ace queen, there's a very good chance that he will flat versus my turn raise. especially if he's paying attention, because um, my turn raise isn't as nutted as some players. So I am going to have some non-super strong hands in this spot, especially versus a turn c-bet percentage as high as his. And the third type of hand I think he flats here is going to be hands like Jack 10, Jack 8, and his heart draws. Kind of hands that he may not expect them to be good now, but he figures that he's got a ton of equity and a ton of outs on most rivers. So the river comes a blank, 3 clubs, and here I think our decision is fairly simple. We really have no other option but to shove. And there are quite a few hands we can still get value from here. A lot of his ace-x hands are going to have a hard time folding on this type of board, because a lot of my strong hands are going to be raising the flop. He probably does not put a hand as good as ace-9 in my range here. Also, if I am raising the turn with any sort of draws, a lot of those bricked, so there's definitely potential to get hero called here by some Jack X combos. And when I shove this river, we get instantly looked up, and he does turn over the nuts. And while it's unfortunate that he does have this hand, I really don't think there's a whole lot else we can do. I mean, if we're playing results orientated, if I raise this flop, he's not going anywhere. He's definitely going to flat, and we're just going to get it all on the turn instead. So by flatting the flop, I potentially get one more street of value from his bluffs in this instance, with the very small chance that he is going to have a hand that draws out on us when we flat. But I think versus a player that's barreling the turn quite aggressively, this can be a good line to take. Playing some hands like this versus some more regular opponents can also make us much more tricky to play against, because if we're not always check raising our super strong hands and we let him kind of hang himself on lots and lots of different turns, and even in the case of this hand, if the turn comes a complete blank, a deuce through 5, or a king or a queen, definitely we're going to get more value from a hand like 10-8, because it's very unlikely that he's going to fold it for just a single raise. And we'll be building a big pot with great equity in the hand. So we're out of time for this video here. If you have any questions about any of the hands or why I did anything a certain way, please let me know. Thanks.